All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm Kara from Boston Women's Market, and today we have Lauren Barrett and Lauren Forster with us tonight. They are attorneys at BlankRome, which is a Boston-based law firm. And they both come from entrepreneurial families and entrepreneurial types of backgrounds. So that has really influenced the type of law that they've decided to practice and has really influenced their passion for helping small businesses. So I'm so excited I was able to discover them this past year. They have their own Instagram account. I think it's called The Laurens, right?
Yeah,
Legal with
Yeah,
Lauren, the Laurens.
we're
It was
lawyered by the Laurens. It's a very
lawyered by the
silly page.
Laurens. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And the second I saw that pop up, I think like during a holiday market or something, you guys tagged us. I'm like, oh my God, I have to reach out to these ladies. So that's why we're here tonight. And I will go ahead and hand it over to you two. Just quick housekeeping, cameras are totally optional, whatever you're comfortable with during our Q&A session. If you want to turn your camera on, we love seeing everyone's faces for Q&A. If not, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat and we'll get to them as the webinar goes on. And we are going to be circulating a recording of this. So if you miss anything or you have to leave or you get disconnected, we will be circulating the recording probably tomorrow morning. So with that, I'll hand it over to you two.
Okay, I'm gonna just share my screen just to get a presentation up so everyone can see it. Let me know, LB, once that goes through.
Perfect. We're good to go. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us. So this is the Business 101 Essentials for New and Aspiring Entrepreneurs. This is meant to be very casual. So if you do have questions, certainly feel free to let us know. So I'm Lauren Barrett and this is Lauren Forster. So we've actually practiced together for about 4 years now. And before that, we were both had totally separate paths. So Lauren was at a large law firm. I was actually in-house. And as mentioned, we both come from families who had businesses, built them, and then eventually sold them. So we have some pretty unique perspective. We both practice corporate law, so main focus is usually mergers and acquisitions. We also do venture capital, so financings, and then also lots of general corporate work, so contract negotiation, things from helping people get their businesses off the ground, helping with operating agreements, which we'll go into a little bit more as we get through the presentation. But that is a little bit about us, so you have that context. Lauren, if you want to talk a little bit about where we come from.
Yeah, so both Lauren and I work at a firm called BlankRome. We have, I think it's now like technically 17 offices across the US and one office in Shanghai. We have over 750 attorneys, 23 practices. And, I just want to say Lauren and I are based in Boston, so probably local to most of you. But we have clients all over the US and they all are involved in a lot of different industries, which is always fun. Here's a list of some of our practices. Not going to bore you with all of them, but some that are fun that I think would be cool to mention is some of our clients are in cannabis and aerospace. We have food and beverage, plastics, and then also some life sciences.
Perfect. So, and one thing I did forget to mention is that Lauren is not just on the corporate team, but she's also in the cannabis team as well. So she has a very broad background in that sense too. So if that's a niche or something you're interested in, she is definitely your girl to get some more information on that. So very, very high level for what we're going to go through on this session is first choosing the right business entity. We saw some questions come in for when you registered. We're going to try to hit a lot of those for kind of figuring out when to be what entity. So that is a piece of the puzzle. We'll then go through and do some steps to take for entity formation. So you walk away with some things that are actually actionable. And then we're going to go through key considerations for new business owners. This is going to be very, very high level. When we get to this slide, you'll see it's a bit of a laundry list because it's a combination of things that we want you to know about now where you're at in your business, and then things that we want to just kind of plant a seed for as you do continue to grow your business. A lot of times some of the items that people start to think about a little bit too late. So we want to make sure we just plant a few seeds when you're currently growing your business as well. And then at the end, we're going to go through a few additional resources that you guys can pull from. And of course, take any questions you might have. I can't promise we'll know all the answers, but we can certainly give it a go. And hopefully you'll leave here a little bit more confident in the legal side of the business that you're running. So jump to the next one. Perfect. So this here was a majority of the questions actually that came through when you were signing up. So we're going to go through each one of these a little bit more in detail. I think for the most part, you're from looking at the business lists that we saw, most of you are going to land in the sole proprietorship or LLC bucket. So we'll spend more time on those two. And then S-Corp and C-Corp will, of course, kind of give you guys a lay of the land there as well. But for the most part, we're going to spend more time in those first two. So sole proprietorship. This is the easiest. It's the least expensive. You can wake up tomorrow and start practicing your business, whatever it may be. Ownership structure, it's just one person. It is you. You are the one running the business. There are some downsides to this, of course, because there's no liability protections. And also you can't pass down a business, right? It's yours. It ends with you. So that's just something to keep in mind and consider. Again, though, it is the least expensive because there's not additional requirements that you're going to have to go through. Whereas if you had an LLC, there are, different fees and things like that and registrations that you'd need to pay attention to. Again, this is owner managed, so you are the one calling all the shots. There's no paperwork that you need to abide by. There's no operating agreement. It's all you. There's the other thing to kind of flag is that this is pass-through income, right? So you're just claiming this on your own personal taxes. Which I think in the sense it makes things a little bit easier if your business falls nicely into this bucket. And we'll talk a little bit more about when it makes sense to maybe pivot to an LLC versus staying as a sole proprietorship. And then I guess the last thing to say is, again, all the profits go to you. So there's no hoops to jump through. Whereas an LLC, it's a little bit more complex because there are costs associated with it. The benefit though is that it could be more than one person. And this is something that is, as you're growing, something to keep in mind because, if you're a sole proprietor, it's going to be really difficult to have an investor come in, right? Because, they're not necessarily going to want to give money directly to you into your bank account, whereas an LLC, it comes across as a little bit more professional, right? Because you have an actual LLC formed, there's a separate bank account. So it's a little bit easier to differentiate the business between the personal. The other piece is there are different tax elections you can make in an LLC. So it's passed through by default. But again, just hinting at the S-Corp side, you can be an LLC and elect to be an S-Corp. And again, we'll go through that a little bit more.
Yeah, and I would just add, on the LLC side of things, if you have like a partner that that also has ownership in your entity and you both form an LLC, you would by default be considered a partnership. And the difference is that if the LLC was only owned by you, it would be what they call as true pass-through, meaning it's just you, it flows on your personal return. But once you have a partner in an LLC, you then have to file a partnership tax return, which we can talk about, or if you had elected to be an S-Corp or a C-Corp, which I'll get into in a second, you would file a separate tax return. So a good way to remember this is, okay, I formed an LLC. If it's just me, pass through personal return. If it's somebody else, you're going to have to file an additional tax return, with the IRS just to claim any income or losses. The next on the bullet is an S corporation. So an S corporation it's similar to an LLC in the sense it's an entity that you form. You'll register with the state that you're operating in, and you'll form something that has the word Inc., INC, or company in the title. And you'll also make an additional election with the IRS to say that you're an S corp. What the heck does that mean? So basically, it means that you want to be treated pass through, your profits and losses pass through to you as the owner. And I'll talk about the difference between a C Corp in a second, but think S Corp similar to LLC, but I probably have the word Inc. or company, corporation in the name. And it's an additional filing that you have to make the IRS. S Corps, they're only allowed to be owned by certain types of people. For example, like can't be owned by an LLC or a corporation, and there are certain trusts that also can't own it. It's usually just individuals and certain permitted trusts that are allowed to own an S Corp and allow you to make that tax election. As compared to a C corporation, where it's similar in the sense that it's an entity, again, that you're formed with the state that you're operating in. So you have a corporate shield that Lauren and I will talk about on the next slide. So you're not a sole proprietor on your own. You have this corporate veil, but you're taxed twice. You're taxed both at the corporation level, and then the company itself, and then you're going to be taxed as a shareholder of that corporation. So the accountants call it a double tax. You're paying taxes twice. Well, Lauren, why the heck would I pay taxes twice if I only have to pay it once, right? So the reason is because once you get over a certain revenue threshold, the money's coming in the door, your accountants will likely say, you know what, it's going to make sense to transition to a C Corp. And your accountants will probably give you that threshold, explain to you why that makes sense, but just at a high level, again, on this slide, we're just going to say that's generally why you end up doing the double tax, for a C Corp.
So we threw a lot at you guys, so we have just a Cliff Notes version of what we just talked about. So sole proprietorship, it's simple. You have full control over everything, minimal paperwork, so it tends to be the least expensive option. The downsides, again, there's no liability protection, so you would be personally liable and on the hook for anything that might happen. It can be harder to raise capital, and again, it ends with the owner. And then for an LLC, you do get that limited liability protection. It's a little bit more flexible for management, which we'll talk about operating agreements in the next slide, which will kind of give you guys a little bit more clarity on that piece. And then fewer formalities than corporations, but the con is that there are more formalities than a sole proprietorship. So and again, the other piece of an LLC is it does vary state by state. I think for the level of where your business is now, from the information that we've gotten, it doesn't really, we hear this a lot. Should I, get an LLC in Delaware? should I get an LLC in Mass? It really depends on, if there's something specific to the type of business that you're doing. For what we've seen, I think Massachusetts is typically fine for a lot of smaller businesses when they're first starting out. You can always, you know, convert and change if you start out as an LLC. It doesn't mean you have to stay in LLC, and it also doesn't mean if you started your LLC in Delaware that you have to stay in Delaware as an LLC. You can change things as you grow. That being said, I wanted to flag when, because this is one of the questions I think we saw was, when is it common for you to shift from a sole proprietorship to an LLC? So typically what we see, of course, the pros and cons we just talked about, but in practice, if, you're starting to grow your business and you're seeing that there's going to be more liabilities than you're used to or that you're comfortable with, we'll see people shift to an LLC. Also, if you're starting to hire employees, it's a lot cleaner to go through an LLC because you can do your payroll and all of that through an LLC a little bit better and easier than, a sole proprietorship. And then also as you're growing to, seek funding, or if, you have a stellar employee and you want to have them, be incentivized to stay and continue to work for you, and you want to give them, maybe a piece of the company, which we'll talk about a little bit more later as well. So those are typically the reasons we see the shift from sole proprietorship to a limited liability company.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that LB said. I would just add too, I think the heart of it is that liability protection, and maybe I can drill down a little bit more on what Lauren and I mean by that. So if you're a sole proprietorship and say, for some reason you're not paying your vendors back because XYZ happened, maybe you were getting a loan that fell through, or you just don't have the money right now, right? You're waiting for the sales to come through. If you're a sole proprietorship and your vendor wanted to recover on the invoices that you owe them, they would sue you personally. Whereas if you had an LLC, they're suing the LLC. They can't pass through to your personal assets. So that's what we mean when we say pass through. You have a corporate layer of protection, or what the lawyers call it, a corporate veil, meaning in the lawsuit, it's just your LLC. If your LLC doesn't have any assets or it's judgment proof, it ends there. It never goes to you in, your personal assets that you have. So for the most part, we would typically recommend to our clients to at least have an LLC. I think in Massachusetts, it might cost $500 to file. And then your EIN, I think, might be $100 or $150. But generally it's inexpensive and for the benefit that you're getting, which is that corporate veil protection. We'll talk maybe later on in the slides about when that corporate veil could kind of dwindle down, when people might be able to come through and pass the corporate veil to your personal assets. Just means that you need good hygiene on your company, but Lauren and I can talk about that later. But generally, when we're saying, liability protection, that's what we mean. If there's ever a lawsuit, if an employee comes after you for wages unpaid, or investor says that you're not running the business right like you promised, that corporate protection allows it to stay at the company level and never to you. Maybe this is a good time to stop and see if there are any questions, and no worries if not, but I know that we're just talking a lot of legal jargon, so stop us, if there's anything we can help explain.
And guys, if you have questions, you can plop them in the chat, or if anyone wants to, I think there's a raise your hand feature on this, or just unmute yourself and introduce yourself and your business. You're more than welcome to do that. So we'll just pause for a couple seconds. I know every time I sit into a legal workshop of some type, I'm like, I really have to check on X, Y, and Z. It makes me think about my own business and and things that maybe I'm like neglecting because it's not fun and I need to go take a look at where things stand. So this is very helpful so far. So Heather asked, would liability also protect you from customers?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So if you sold a product and it ended up being defective or it hurt somebody, us lawyers are trying to think of the worst things that can happen. Or you didn't disclaim something you should have. Yes, that is another reason for the liability protection is that a customer would have to sue your entity because that's what you were doing business as. That's what you've incorporated with the state that you're doing business under. So yes, it's one of the other reasons as well.
Yeah, it's literally any, potential lawsuit that would be covered under that. So that's why a lot of people do shift to an LLC.
Great.
Looks like we have another question. I know you mentioned it's easier to hire employees on an LLC. Is it still possible to hire people as a sole prop?
Yeah, you can still hire people. And we're not tax attorneys, but I'm sure that there are means of doing it the right way and making sure that, taxes are appropriately reported and abided by, but that would definitely be something that you'd have to keep a close watch on. I don't know, Lauren, if you had any other details on that.
Yeah, I would just add, if you are a sole proprietor and you onboarded employees, you should get an EIN number. It's an employment identification number. It's for the IRS so that when you're paying your employees their payroll and compensation, you need to be able to have an EIN so the IRS can track you as a business that has employees.
And the one thing that we'll say, like, as we're going through these things, so I know we're talking about EINs and filing things. If you go to the Secretary of State, if you go to their website, and we'll talk about this too when we get to resources, but they have a really great step-by-step guide of a lot of these things. Like, for example, for your EIN, I think it's yes, thank you. I think it's like a one pager. It's fairly simple and straightforward. So that's a great resource just to even if you don't know if you need it yet or want it yet, it's a good way to kind of at least get your feet wet and figure out what exactly does it entail. Most of these things are not huge lifts, but it's definitely a site you should get familiar with if you aren't already.
All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions right now.
Okay, great. I'll keep trucking through. So I do want to do just another high level on the bottom of the screen, the C-Corp and the S-Corp again. So with both of these entity formations, you get that corporate veil that we've been talking about. The main difference between a C and S-Corp and limited liability company is they're a little bit more stringent on the rules that you have to follow. So generally with any C or S corporation, it requires the shareholder or the owner to have yearly meetings. You have to have a formal meeting via minutes that you have to make or, a meeting with a consent without a meeting, which means you need to paper up certain elections. Sometimes it's kind of silly, right? If it's just you running the business and you owning the business, like how the heck can you meet with yourself? You really can't. So there are just forms that you can use to say, okay, yearly meeting, if you took any material corporate action, like you got a loan, so you want to make sure you document that it was, approved, the corporation was allowed to enter into a loan or maybe you hired an executive and that required an employment agreement, which we'll get to. Like big things that happen in the company from a legal documentation perspective, those are the things that are recorded in the meeting, electing officers, those kinds of things. So that's how corporations in general are different than limited liability companies. I'll cover again kind of the double taxation on the C Corp again. So if you were to incorporate as a C corporation, the C Corp would get taxed first on profits, losses on that tax return, and then the shareholder also would get taxed on any distributions or money that was transferred from the corporation to the shareholder as a dividend or distribution. You might have heard that term before. So that's kind of a double tax level. It makes sense when a company is making over a certain amount of revenue. The accountants are the best ones to tell you when this is a good time, rather than your lawyers. And the only reason why people elect for C Corp versus S Corp is because S corporations are a pass-through type of tax liability. There's no double tax at the entity and shareholder level. But S Corp is only allowed for certain types of shareholders. I think the limit is, yeah, it's right on here, 100 shareholders in the form of individuals. So you can have up to 99, people to be a part of an S Corp, but there can't be an LLC that owns in an S Corp, or certain trusts are not allowed to be owners of an S Corp. So that's another reason why that election is not available for some shareholders. Okay. We did want to cover what it takes to form an LLC, just because this is the entity we see most often, especially in startups, probably similar to yourself. So Lauren and I felt like let's dive in a little bit here. And then, of course, if you have questions after, this webinar on some of the other forming an S Corp or C Corp, we have our contact information in the last slide that we can give you. But in terms of forming an LLC, okay, what the heck do I do? So similar to what LB has already said, the state that you operate in, I would mostly start there. If you're a smaller business, and you're a type of business that works with consumers directly, you want to incorporate for the most part in the state that you're operating in. So if you're located, Lauren and I are in Boston. So say we're located in Boston, we would want to go on the Massachusetts Secretary of State's website. And you could do as easy as Googling like Form LLC Massachusetts Secretary of State. There are very helpful links that we have some resources in the back, and it will show you that you can fill in these forms online for an LLC in Massachusetts. You'll have to put the name of the business. You'll put your name as an authorized person of the business. You'll have to go through the purpose of the business. Say Lauren and I had a jewelry company, we would write that in. And this would be all in what's called on the right hand of the screen, a certificate of organization. It sounds so official. All it means is, hey, I'm forming an LLC. I need everybody in Massachusetts to know so that I can get that liability corporate veil protection. And then you'd file that online. That's the form that I said was about $500 in Massachusetts. And you'd submit that, and once the state gets back to you, says, thanks so much, Lauren, for forming your entity, you're all set to go. You are now up and running. That's what I would say would be step number 1 to form. Step number 2 would be your bottom right of the screen is your EIN number. That's, Lauren and I already mentioned this term, but it's the number that you need for hiring employees. It's also for your tax return that you need to let the IRS know whether you're a pass-through entity or you're going to be taxed as the entity itself. You need this number. A usual question Lauren and I get are like, well, I don't plan on hiring employees. Do I need an EIN? The answer is yes, you should still get one. You'll see on the EIN form on the IRS's website that it asks you, do you plan in the next, I think it's a 12-month look back, do you plan to hire employees? And you can check off, no, in the next 12 months, I don't plan on it. And it just lets the IRS know like, hey, okay, we don't have to worry about the Lauren's Jewelry Company right now, but at least they have an EIN in case they do end up hiring someone. I think the next step, I would say I'm going to go to the left of the screen. It's the operating agreement. So if you're the sole owner of your LLC, you actually don't need an operating agreement. Generally, what an operating agreement is, it's an agreement between the owners of the LLC and the management of the LLC, like officers, board of director type of roles, and it governs how the company, the shareholders, and the managers will interact together. A good example of this is who has authority to appoint an officer. Can any shareholder do that? Can just the managers or the board do that? And what types of actions can the board approve without the shareholders knowing about it? So it sounds pretty formal. You generally only need it if you have more than one shareholder, I would say, and then also if you want a board to run the company. Anything I missed, LB, on that one?
No, that was great.
Okay, sweet. So then next step, we've done our certificate of organization on the top right-hand side. We got our EIN number, bottom right, and then now we're on the left-hand side of the screen. We decided, do we need an operating agreement? Do we not? And then the next step, I would say the fourth step, is going to be your organizational consents. This is a legal document that most states have a statute that requires that some type of corporate action is done by the shareholders to say, I am a legit company. My tax year runs by 12/31 every year. And there's just certain formalities that you need in place in order to make sure that your corporate veil is intact. AKA, it means that you're running it like a company. This isn't just a shell of me, just trying to do business because I want the veil. I'm actually, this is a real entity and I'm running it that way. Good forms of these are online. You could probably search organizational consents or LLC, formation consent. And we can touch on this in the resources as well. But generally, those are the types of matters that these consents cover. It's election of officers, election of directors, what your fiscal year is, and basically who has authority to act on the company. Is it both Laurens? Is it just one Lauren? You kind of document that on a Word document, have it signed, and file it in a safe place. You'll also, for those of you that have tried to open bank accounts for an entity like an LLC, the bank will often ask you for your EIN, your certificate of organization, your operating agreement if you have one, and then also your organizational consent. So that's also why we're highlighting these, is the banks usually want them as well. And last, I'll cover foreign qualification registration. So what the heck is this? Usually your accountants ask you like, oh, do you have any foreign quals? And, most of the time people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Really what it is if, say you live in Massachusetts, but you do a lot of business in Maine, and you actually have an office in Maine that you work out of. Maybe Lauren and I craft the jewelry out of Maine, but we live in Massachusetts. In that instance, and the accountants also can help you through this analysis, you're considered to have a nexus, a relationship with Maine, that even though you live in Massachusetts, you're really doing a lot of your business in Maine, which means you have to go on the Maine Secretary of State website and let them know that you're doing business there. So you'd file a similar type of certificate of organization with Maine specifically, but it would be a foreign company's registration, meaning you're foreign in the sense that you're a Massachusetts business, but you're coming to Maine to also do business. So it's just an additional registration that you should just think through the analysis. Do I do business anywhere where I would need to also register and let that state know?
One thing just to flag on this, because I don't want someone sitting there with an LLC to be like, oh my gosh, I've done, no foreign qualifications. I don't have any organizational consents. It's so common. Lauren and I work with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, and you know, we see a lot of organizations have to clean up, like, so we just call it corporate cleanup, which is essentially going back and, okay, putting together those organizational consents and making sure you do have the proper approvals in place. So it's not something that anyone on this call should be, you know, having a panic attack about right now. You can clean it up. It's okay. You can definitely go back and fix this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I will say too, something that we don't have on here, because again, Lauren and I aren't tax attorneys, but we know enough to be a bit dangerous, is if you are forming an entity, you should talk to an accountant about, do you have to register with the Department of Revenue for that state? So for Massachusetts, we have what's called Mass Tax Connect. And a lot of the time, even if you're a pass-through LLC, meaning you're only planning on filing your personal return because it's, you know, you're the only owner, you most likely have to register with Mass Tax Connect for your tax return. You're gonna have to pay state taxes, and that's how they track it. So I would just say, if for those of you taking notes, just write down like State Department of Revenue registration ? And kind of either talk to your financial advisor or accountant about whether you need to do that.
We do have one question if this is okay time.
Yeah, definitely.
Heather's asking if it's a reoccurring fee for an LLC or is it just the $500?
So it's typically state dependent, and it's usually either annually or biannually. I don't know, Lauren, do you know what Massachusetts is? I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure they hit you with 500 every
Is
year.
it every year? Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
they do. We just had it.
sure, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's 500 every year. It sucks.
Yeah, yeah, and Heather, that's such a good question, because in what the states will call it is an annual report. Annually, the states want you to not only pay them the $500 fee, um, but they also want to know, hey, was there any updates to your business? Like, are there any new officers that are authorized to act on your business? Some states like Delaware even make you pay taxes at that time. So you should look into your state's requirements, and they're usually very user-friendly, like Lauren mentioned. Go on the Secretary of State, on your state that you're incorporated, and just click through kind of like the 101 guides, and it will tell you annually, this is what we require. I will say Massachusetts does not make you pay taxes when you're filing your annual update. So another plug for Massachusetts, why if you're around here, you might want to form there.
Yeah. And then one of the other things too is for if you do have a foreign qualification, it's also important to check out that state because sometimes your foreign qualification registrations will also have additional things tied to it that could potentially be annual, biannual. So it's definitely important to make sure you take a look at that state as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say the EIN is a one-time fee. So once you get that EIN number, the IRS will mail you kind of they're very old school. They'll email you if you do it online, they'll email you a form, but they'll also mail you like the legit certification of your number. And I would just say file that in a super safe place because that's something that usually, you know, your banks want to see that proof of EIN, that formal letter from the IRS. Sometimes insurance companies want to see it. So that's an important document to just kind of keep filed away. The best part is the certificate of organization when you're registering with the state. Those are online for the most part. For Massachusetts, many states have them online, some don't. So if you can't find your certificate of organization, you can either reorder it from the state or you can just go on Massachusetts Secretary of State Business Search and search your filings, and it's right there.
And this is, I know most people are going to be probably in Massachusetts, but, you know, saying certificate of organization as well, just going back to that one in particular, sometimes different states had different titles. So I just want to make sure that that is just known generally that if you're, you know, say you don't want to incorporate in Mass or you don't want to do an LLC in Mass and you want to go somewhere else, it might have a different name there. So people will know what you're talking about. So if you do ask, it's completely fine to say, you know, certificate of organization, but it could be under a different name, which I know is not ideal when you're trying to keep track of all this stuff. But I just wanted to make sure I toss that out there so that you were aware.
That's a good point, LB. It also made me think of this registration is different than registering for a DBA, whether through the state or locally. So a good example is my husband has a business. You know, he has to register the DBA with the town of Rentham where we live. That is completely different than him registering his company with the state of Massachusetts. So to have the corporate veil, you need the registration with the state. The DBA doesn't really protect you in terms of a corporate veil. It allows you to use that trade name in the specific location that you're at. So that's another, I think, misconception sometimes that our clients come and say, well, Lauren, I already registered, I have my DBA. And I'm like, ooh, yes, you do have your DBA, which allows you to use your name, but let's make sure that we register you with the state just so we get that corporate veil intact.
And just for clarity, DBA is just the doing business as name. It's just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention on this slide, so like Lauren said, we have a lot of startup clients. They're one of our favorites to work with. Probably many business owners like you guys who are super passionate about their business. That's like one of our favorite stages of the business cycle. There is, I know, very tempting to use LegalZoom to form your company. I understand that legal is probably one of the expenses not a lot of people want to pay. I will say just the formation is worth getting a lawyer who does it rather than using LegalZoom. I've had clients that have used LegalZoom. They didn't file it properly with the state. It caused issues. You know, they filed in California. California triggers taxes when you're filing, and everything was all messed up. The LegalZoom also are form-based that aren't necessarily protective for your business. So I had a client that they formed with LegalZoom, and their organizational consents said that they, as owners, all owed all fiduciary duties that the law allows. What that means is it just put extra burdens on them when they're acting in their company. Now the law was saying, well, you can't do business with, you know, your brother's lighting company, even though you bought it for fair pricing because you didn't follow the protocols under the law to do a relationship type transaction. So also say, I know LegalZoom is super tempting, but I will say it's worth having a lawyer at least look over the LegalZoom documents if you're going to use LegalZoom. Otherwise, like Lauren and I said, Massachusetts Secretary of State or a lot of Secretary of States have walkthrough instructions that you could do on your own as well.
Okay,
Perfect.
so this slide, so kind of piggybacking off of what Lauren just said, we definitely know that legal expenses are, you know, a lot, especially when you're first starting. So we thought it would be helpful to just flag a few things on here that if you do need to get counsel, what we think makes the most sense of, you know, the best bang for your buck, essentially. So as Lauren said, formation, of course, but then if you find yourself commonly using or getting into the same situation, so for example, if you're, you know, always commissioning art maybe for an office space, or you know, someone wants to, you're selling something and you always want to make sure that it's very, very clear what the expectations are. Having a form put in place that you can basically plug in just the high level things that you can keep reusing the same form over and over again, that is the perfect opportunity to have counsel draft that for you and add in footnotes. So it's like every time something comes in, you don't have to go back to an attorney. You can go reference, you know, if A, do this, if B, do that. We see that a lot. And that's definitely a really good use of your time and money, because it kind of helps put things specific to your business, because there's so many nuances between, you know, a jewelry making business versus maybe if you're selling, you know, bath products or something like that, there's just different things to keep in mind, especially when it comes to different liabilities that might be out there, and expectations, things like that. So that's just one area that I would highlight, saying that might be a good spot to call someone in. And we'll, on the last slide, we'll talk a little bit about some resources that are a little bit more reasonable than going to, you know, a typical law firm. So it's, you know, hopefully going to be worth your time on that one. Next up is NDAs. So I'm going to talk about NDAs with the next one as well, non-compete and non-solicitation. So I'm sure a lot of people have kind of heard in the news that, you know, some of these things are not upheld anymore, so it doesn't make sense. There are so many ways that these actually do still make a lot of sense and they are upheld. So, for example, if you have a product and you're, you know, selling a bath product and you have a formula that you know, think is really important to your business, it might make sense to have, you know, another employee or, you know, someone who's working with you, whether it be a consultant, a third party, sign a non-disclosure. And then for non-complete, non-solicitation, this is something just again to flag as you do get bigger. If you have employees, especially if it's a smaller team, you want to make sure that your employees can't learn everything that you've developed for your business, and also, you know, then take that away and then solicit your employees and take them with them. So that's just something to bake in, and Lauren's going to talk a little bit about consulting and employment agreements, but usually you can bake that into those agreements. It's short, it's sweet, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but it just gives you that added protection as you do grow and develop your business. I think I saw a question come in and I'm guessing it's about this, so I don't know if we want to take a peek at that.
Yeah, it says, what about PR and brand ambassadors?
Yeah, so same thing. You can still have, and Lauren's going to talk again, which it'll fall a little bit under consulting and employment as well, but you can absolutely have, you know, agreements in place. Again, it has to be reasonable though. So if it's a brand ambassador or, you know, someone who's doing a lot of work, probably with a lot of other entities or companies, you just have to make sure that it's super, super specific. So, you know, non-solicitation makes a lot of sense, right? They're your employees. Non-compete, I don't know. It kind of depends, right? It depends on the situation. If it really, again, it's very situational because it can't be too broad, because then it does fall into the bucket of not being able to be upheld, because you have to think about a reasonable factor. So most of the time what ends up happening is it has to be reasonable in the breadth of it. When you think about, say you do bath products and you're telling them they can't, you know, do anything with jewelry, but you only do bath products. So it doesn't make sense for you to hinder that person from doing something that's unrelated to your business. And then the second thing that's typically viewed is, you know, scope when it comes to geographic area. So it could be if you only are, you know, conducting business in Massachusetts, you can't say all of the United States, you know, you can't do this, you know, you can't compete in, or whatever it might be. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you are putting these, you know, using these provisions, is to try and keep the scope as tight as possible. Of course, making sure it's reasonable to you, but also reasonable to them. So it kind of has to be that happy balance to make sure it's still upheld.
Yeah, I'll just add something too. With brand ambassadors and really any kind of like vendor type person you're working with, NDAs is a must. And
Yes.
that falls into the bucket that Lauren was talking about. Is it's worth getting a lawyer give you a form, non-disclosure agreement. All of our clients, that's like one of the first things that they ask for, because you're going to be sharing sensitive information about your company. It could be, if it's bath products, it could be the recipe for your, your soaps. It could be, if you're doing jewelry, it could just be who you get your materials from. Maybe that's just a super secret person. You get them on special pricing. You don't want anyone else to know that. You don't want them to share that information. So NDAs, I would say, have one at the ready at all times. If you're ever doing business with someone, before you sign something, before they send you an invoice or have you sign up online, definitely make them sign a non-disclosure agreement first. It protects all your information of your company and protects them from not being able to disclose it. And then Lauren already covered the non-compete and the non-solicitation is where that reasonable analysis comes in. But the NDAs is separate from being reasonable.
Yeah.
Most always, if you're doing business with someone, you should be sending them your NDA.
And again, as Lauren said, these can be, it's part of that first thing is having those forms just on deck. And there is no shame in the game of deleting a name, putting another one in and sending it out. That's honestly, especially for businesses that are just starting, we highly, highly recommend having those forms on deck and just continuing to recycle them. So let's see. Next is, so vesting. This is one that is more me planting a seed because we see this so often that as you grow your business right now, vesting might not be the first thing in your mind. Essentially, this is saying if you have a stellar employee, for example, and you want to make sure that they're incentivized to continue working for you, and you say, you know what, I want to give them a piece of the pie, right? So I want to give them, for simplicity and math purposes, I will say 40%. But that's a little crazy, but 40%. And you say, over the next 10 years, or over the next 4 years, I will give you 10%. So instead of saying, right now, I'm going to give you all 40%, and then now you own it and you can walk away without helping continue to cultivate the business and continue to grow it, right? Because the incentive is like, okay, yeah, sure, I have the full 40% now, but if you are having that person wait and every year they continue to get a little bit more, it helps A, make sure they're going to stay, right? And B, that they really have this incentive. Like, if I work hard, this is also mine too. So it's a protection for you and also an incentive for them. So that's why I'm saying it now, because we see this often where people get excited, they give away their company to people when it's smaller. And then down the line, they're like, wow, this actually worked. This was a great company. It ended up becoming this bigger thing. And now you have a partner who maybe left a month after they got this big, chunk of your company. And that's not fair because now you're the one putting all of this effort into it without their help. And they're also going to reap the benefit. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's super common. So again, that's a little bit early on for us to talk about that, but just wanted to plant the seed. So as your business does grow, that you keep this in mind.
Great. I will say, Lauren just made me think of this. It kind of relates to vesting. If you're going to give an employee equity, you can't do that in a sole proprietorship. So again, like we are talking about, a company, an entity that you have registered. Even with a partnership, if you don't register it by common law, you guys are partners, so you generally share 50-50. So this whole vesting actually goes to once you form an entity and you're starting to give away your equity. So I'm going to cover the next few bullets. So consulting agreements. So first step, before you even get here, you should have sent them your NDA. So after they sign that NDA, they agree they're going to keep your information confidential. They're not going to share it with anybody. Then we can start talking about consulting agreements. These are also called like independent contractor agreements, service agreements. Think of it as your suppliers, your vendors that you're doing business with. Usually for startups, the form of consulting agreement actually comes from their vendor, because usually the vendor is a little bit more experienced than the startup, so they're going to send you over your form. Lauren and I's next session next week, plug to join. It's going to go over some important provisions in a consulting agreement, so I'm not going to waste your time on that now. I will just plug and say that we're going to give you specific kind of key things to look for. If you don't hire an attorney, just at least have these things in mind. And obviously, if you do hire an attorney, that's great. It just helps you better understand kind of what you're signing. But that's what a consulting agreement is. It's going to be with your suppliers, your vendors, not your customers. Employment agreements. When should you have one? So I would say if you're onboarding an employee, they don't necessarily need an employment agreement. Usually by trade, employment agreements are for more senior, serious type of relationships. Like if you were hiring a chief marketing officer because you're forgetting your brand ambassador, you want a CMO, you want somebody high level, they'll probably be expecting something like an employment agreement. It will list out their salary, it will list out benefits, it will list out severance if they have it. So think of that more senior, serious type of employees. If you don't have that and you're just bringing on somebody, say a family member, to just help you with your business, you're just starting and you want to start helping pay someone so that you can maybe move a little bit faster, we would call those offer letters. I do really stress both Lauren and I to get something in writing. If it's not an employment agreement, meaning a full agreement, it can be a 2-page offer letter. It can be a 1-page offer letter. But once you take on employees, the legal world expects a certain responsibility out of you as an employer. So it's very important to get that documented. You basically want to write, some of the main things are obviously the name of the employee, what their title is, what their duties are, and the duties can change from time to time. Just make sure you have that language. And also what their compensation is. And for compensation, I would put it in 2 buckets. 1, are you paying them hourly or salary? And 2, are you offering them benefits? If you're not, make that very explicit. So long way to say, just make sure you have something in writing for when you bring on employees. Any questions on that? Because I know employees can be a hot topic.
Well, I just have a quick question. I know we're like running short on time, but a lot of us, you know, we're new, we're just hiring one employee here, one employee there, seasonal kind of thing. And a lot of the times, like from speaking to people, they, you know, it's just email correspondence. It's like, hey, like, does this sound good? Okay. Like, is like $20 an hour okay? Okay. Like, if you ever get into a pickle and like, you know, have a problem with that employee, is that kind of correspondence enough to really like protect you?
Good question. So under the law, anything in writing can be a contract if there's consideration, right? So those emails can bind you into some kind of agreement, employment relationship. It's much better to have it, and again, in an offer letter can be a form that an employee, an attorney just gives you plug and play, right? Just certain fields to jump in. But yes, you wouldn't really want it. The risk of having it in email correspondence is then you're getting this trail of, okay, 20 an hour, but what else? You know, your employee could say, yeah, she said 20 an hour, but she also told me that I got 10 sick days. You know what I mean? And then it's a battle of the words. It's, you know, did you say that? Didn't you say that? If it's in your offer letter and it's signed by the other person, it's just better evidence to show this was what our relationship was. And, you know, the email was just correspondence. We really didn't agree on anything. That's a good question. Even for interns, honestly, I know the lawyers are so annoying, but I would get it in writing. You never know. There have been lawsuits, mostly with legal interns in law firms, but there are, you know, you name it. There are lawsuits that happen where interns say they were promised this, promised that, you know, so it's just less of a headache if you get it in that offer letter. Okay, and I know we're running quick on time, so I'll just generally highlight protecting your intellectual property. that should also go hand in hand with sending an offer letter or employment agreement. Another plug that next week we're going to talk about types of agreements of how to protect your IP. The second to last bullet is just understanding what business license you need, permits, local regulations. So that example I gave about my husband using a DBA, Rentham requires you to register in the town. I had to look that up for him. Each town is a little bit different. So just based on your business, kind of, see what is required. And then kind of the last bullet is just the importance of record keeping and using an accountant. So it goes hand in hand with creating an entity. You want to act like a company. So you want to, keep a balance sheet on hand, have an accountant's number. Even if you don't use them often, you don't necessarily need your own bookkeeper to have to hire that, especially when money is tight when you're first starting out. But at least try your best to keep your books, your revenue coming in, your receipts. QuickBooks is great for that. I feel like they have new pricing tools for startup companies. I know I've had clients that use them, and there are other competitors of QuickBooks that use it too. But the more you can act like a corporation and having an accountant on speed dial is super important, because things will come up. Once you do business, I feel like the questions start flooding in terms of from the state or from customers or things. So always good to have a team. And that kind of brings us to this slide. This is just 3 people who Lauren and I would say to all our startups, like, just get somebody's number. Even if you don't engage them, great to ask questions. A lot of the time, consultations are free, super free. So use that. You should take advantage of it. And even if you're not going to use them now, it's great to have later when you grow and you need them as something comes up.
Then again, I won't run through this. I know we're over. Sorry, guys. But this is, I know you guys will get a recording of this, so you'll be able to see this slide. But here are just some resources to check out too. Just to flag are for the Boston Bar, Mass Bar, or American Bar Association, and also Chamber of Commerce. You can contact both of these and talk to them and see who will give you a sliding scale when it comes to fees. And a lot of times they'll look at what your income is and help you determine how much money you'd actually have to pay for legal services. And then a huge thing I would say is check out local law schools. There's a ton of pro bono clinics out there that can help. And then we are also opening a pro bono through our firm as well. That's going to have certain criteria that they're still working through, but we'll be able to share that as well. So as soon as we know, we will let you guys know. And then our session, a second session, May 21st, so next Wednesday, to go into a little bit more of the nitty gritty when it comes to contracts.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, to add about the pro bono thing, Lauren and I are super excited to have our firm to be able to offer this. So even if it takes a little bit for us to get back to you, this is our email. This is also our Instagram, which we do on the side just for fun to give legal tips, because we have a lot of startup clients. So we think it's fun for them to see some of the things that we're working on and quick advice. But this is our email. So feel free, if we don't reach out to you first, you can absolutely reach out to both of us, ask us, hey, is a pro bono clinic on? And it will allow us to help some qualified women, small businesses get kick-started and give some legal advice pro bono. So
That's like so essential. I know Boston Women's Market, we were able to get our first legal advice through a pro bono program, and it was, to this day, is still helping us. So it's so valuable. So if you guys keep me posted, I'll keep everyone else posted too. So that's awesome. Yeah, and as the Lauren said, our next session to go more in depth is on May 21st at 6:30. So if you haven't registered for that yet, go back to the Empower Her webinar series page to register, and we can send you the all the Zoom info to join. Thank you so much. This was very insightful. I know I have like my list of to-dos tomorrow morning that I need to check things on. So and if anyone has any follow-up questions after this, you're welcome to email the Lawrence or email your questions to me and I can pass them on, whatever everyone's comfortable with. But thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, and it was really great.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and
Yeah, thanks for having us.
yeah, absolutely. And thank you to you all for taking some time out of your evening to hang out with us tonight. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.